some of the audience is still all right. That's the only problem.
So
Right.
we can't really wait.
She's got her kids.
We're just waiting for someone's kids to come.
Sorry.
What's that? I think we should start.
You know, one of your speakers saying wait. So
One of our speakers is saying wait, so we're just waiting. Is that all right?
just a couple more minutes.
Just a couple more minutes. We're online now.
Thank you. That's great. Okay. Okay. That's an embarrassment then, but we'll
Okay. Can I introduce you? I'm introducing you. Okay. So we're introducing you first. All right. I'm just going to.
yeah, you do that. Okay.
I'll hang up now. Louise has been, thank you for all for coming. I'm glad you can all fit into all the seats. I know it's very packed and crowded, as it should be, because many people have told me they will come and they're obviously not quite here. Louise is someone I've had the pleasure of knowing, and it was just very, very, very lucky that I was in the car when Peter phoned me and said, it reminded me of this meeting we were having. And I asked Louise if she would speak, and she immediately said yes. So that it's amazing. Louise has been National President of Rural Australians for Refugees for 3 years. The recent conference in Katoomba was fantastic, about 300 people.
No,
200 people.
160.
160 people. Well, when you're sort of estimating left-wing crowds or a humanistic crowd, you tend to overestimate, but it seemed like 300, a very active participation. She's now, it looks like stripped of her title, but it's actually stepped down after 3 years. Sorry. After a long history of social activism, from anti-apartheid and drought resistance action in the 1970s to environmental activism, international voluntary work, which is Vietnam
And Nepal.
and Nepal, and a push for social justice for refugees and people seeking asylum. She also served on Oxfam Australia board from 2004 to 2007 as part of the commitment to international development. And can't read my writing. I like to add my wonderful experience of Louise, absolute generosity. When I first went to Katoomba, and with people I know, and she's done like hands-on work with all sorts of people, the Tibetans in Katoomba, and also Afghan people as well. And as usual, I can't read my own handwriting in notes. And through, of course, if I can just be personal, you work through your terrible bereavement and everything, which I found admirable. And what I wanted to say about the recent conference in Katoomba was the excitement in terms of ideas at that conference, which you don't often find, to be honest, in Katoomba. And yeah, I did promise Louise some flattering, which is very easy to do. Louise has been very much involved with refugees from mainland Tibet, actually, in the Blue Mountains. She's been giving refugees the human face of the country of Australia, which is otherwise the face of Australia is often given by people who are hard, bureaucratic sort of Nazis, punishing and sadistic faces of Portillo, but it's not Portillo. What's the name of that?
Missoula.
Missoula, yes. Who was the head of the department?
Yeah.
That's disgraceful people. Where promotion goes with the ill treatment of refugees and the contravention of the spirit and letter of the Refugee Convention. People actually promoted within the I'm sure you have something to say that promoted within the department according to how often they can reject refugees, which is quite completely bizarre. And that's what made me one thing very happy about the conference was the rousing applause to a national inquiry, a royal commission into the department itself. Because whatever you pass, laws you pass, the department is basically promoting people who hate refugees.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Don't steal my line.
No,
Don't steal my line.
I'm sorry, that's the interruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those words, Stephen. Yes, I have been national president of the Rural Australians for Refugees for the last 3 years. And I'm continuing as a member of the National Committee. I'll just say a few things about the Rural Australians for Refugees. This group was formed in 2001 after the Tampa crisis in August of that year, where a group of women in the Southern Highlands sitting around the kitchen table said, we can't just let this go by. And they formed the first group in the Southern Highlands. And since then, after that, more groups formed around the country. In 2007, when Kevin Rudd was elected and started to dismantle some of the systems, people said, oh, that's great, we can relax now. Didn't take long before they realised they had to get active again. In 2017, a conference was held and the groups came together and decided to elect a national committee, and the national organisation was formed. We have about 70 groups across the country, mainly on the eastern side of the country, down to Tasmania, strongest in Victoria and New South Wales, and some groups in South Australia as well. Each group is quite autonomous, but we work together as a national identity, and we've got a reasonable amount of political clout because we're from rural and regional Australia, not your latte sipping, Chardonnay drinking inner city lefties who congregate in pubs on Sunday afternoon. So, as Stephen mentioned, we held a conference in Katoomba 2 weeks ago, postponed from 2020, and it was huge success because people were so excited to be together again. So we had refugees, people seeking asylum, and refugee advocates, largely from our groups, but also from Grandmothers for Refugees, and Helen was there. So yeah, it was really good. Now, and I will be referring to that somewhat this afternoon. So as we look forward, the first thing that stands out is that we have a Labor majority government. This is good for refugees, right? Sadly, no. Good, but not good enough. On the plus side, ALP have committed to permanent resettlement of those who sought asylum by sea before January 2014 and children born to those families. And these are known as the legacy caseload. And that's it. Nothing more. On the minus side, the Albanese government appointed a US private prison operator to run the Nauru Offshore Processing Centre with the ubiquitous name Management and Training Corporation. So CAMSTRUC lost this lucrative contract on the 30th of September, and MTC, who have a dismal human rights record, took it over. No new asylum seekers have gone to Nauru since 2014, and yet, according to government figures, the cost to hold a single refugee on Nauru is 4.3 million a year. Roll that figure around your tongue. My second minus point is, as Stephen mentioned, Mike Pizzullo, Dutton's right-hand man, continues as Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs. Why? Yeah. My third point is that this government has continued the coalition's miserly figure of the humanitarian refugee visas for 22-23 as 13,750, with an additional 4,125 places for Afghans, which was a long campaign fought and led by the Action for Afghanistan group. But I'm not here to recite the evils. I'm here to look forward. That is the title of today. When I thought about that, three words came to my mind: people, policy, and politics. And I want to start off by talking about people. There are two long-running campaigns that we're all familiar with: Kids Off Nauru and Home to Bilo. And both of those had positive outcomes. Now, both of these campaigns were carefully run and focused on people. Kids Off Nauru had many organisations and individuals behind it, but the focus was always on children. Pictures of children were everywhere. It was personal and touched the hearts of even the most hardened. It worked. In November 2018, Morrison declared that all children would get off Nauru. After years of campaigning and stories of the atrocities that had been inflicted on children. Home to Bilo focused on a family. As Angela Frederick said at the RAR conference 2 weeks ago, it was the bravery of Priya and Nades to tell their story that enabled that campaign to go forward, as well as the determination of the small town of Biloela, 4,500 people in National Party heartland. And that resulted in the ALP actually honouring its promise to give that family permanent residence. Now, some have rightly said that it's not fair that the Nada Salingam family get permanent residence because of a concerted campaign run by people of Biloela and many supporters, when others in the same situation don't get PR. And look at Neil Parra in Ballarat. I don't know if you know Neil, but he and his family, also Tamils from Sri Lanka, came to Australia in 2012. He had a bridging visa for a while, but he lost his bridging visa and was denied refugee status. And he's been living in the community in Ballarat since 2013, supported by the Ballarat community through the local RAR group. He and his family, got 3 children, and had their living costs paid for by the community. Now, Neil is incredibly outspoken. There's a Facebook page where he writes something probably twice a day. And many of his supporters worry about him being so outspoken because he draws attention to himself and may end up being deported and sent back to Sri Lanka. But by being outspoken, he has many supporters. People know him. He's active in the SES. They like him. And he hates being reliant on people for money, but he has no other choice. And I'm sure we all know people like that. My points here are, we want our advocacy to have people at the centre. As Najiba Wazadikos says, nothing about us without us. We want positive stories about people seeking asylum and refugees and what they can offer our country, not just stories of pain and suffering. Linguists tell us that we shut down and stop listening when the stories of pain and suffering overwhelm us. We want refugees telling their stories. That was one of the real strengths of the conference that we held. We heard from the Hazara Women for Change and the work that they're doing to raise money to run hidden schools for girls in Afghanistan. The Ballarat Afghan Action Group who raised money to send food trucks into remote areas of Afghanistan to help people stay alive. I meant to say that Afghanistan is a big focus of RAR's work this year. And also get to know refugees and people seeking asylum. Be guided by them in how you can support them. And often it's friendship that people want. The second P is about policy. Well, I think as Stephen alluded to, immigration policy in this country is a dog's breakfast. The system is broken. We need a clear, transparent system in place urgently. And we need to increase the numbers of humanitarian visas. Now, I'm not going to go on about policy, but the Kaldor Centre for International Law at the University of New South Wales is a terrific place to find out about policy. And this book came out a couple of years ago, Refugee Rights and Policy Wrongs. It's a terrific way to just get a sense of how we've got to this policy position that we have, and from there, how to change it. They published recently some principles for Australian refugee policy. And Stephen, you'll be pleased to know the very first one says Australia should comply with its international legal obligations. One action being reinserting references to the Refugee Convention and the Migration Act, which were removed in 2014. So I'm not going to go on about policy, but it is an incredibly important part of the picture. And that brings us to politics. Now, speaking at the RAR conference, Craig Foster said, refugee advocates should unite around 2 or 3 messages and focus on those. Not everyone agrees with him. It's been argued that there is strength in diversity, yet we can find ourselves running in a number of different directions, diluting what we're calling for. We know that public opinion is not with us. The Lowy Institute publish surveys every year which show that we don't have the public support. I was reading an article from The Conversation earlier, which did a study of 2,000 probably randomly selected people and found that 56% supported the current government policy and 37% disagreed or strongly disagreed with it. But of those figures, only less than 30% were willing to sign a petition and less than 10% were interested in protesting or donating or taking any kind of action. So there's a big step between what you think and what you do. One of the speakers at the conference that really impressed me was Julie Mackin. And Julie was involved some years ago with, along with Pamela Kerr, Carmen Lawrence, in a group called Australian Women in Support of Women on Nauru. And Julie was a journalist with the AFR for a decade, and she spoke about the conference about, she said, I thought that writing stories about the atrocities that were being done, people would say, oh gosh, we've got to stop that. Didn't stop. People didn't say that. So she's gone and done a PhD on why Australia has become a nation that tortures refugees. And she talks about the how. The how is about privatised detention centres onshore and offshore so that we don't see what's going on. Introduce a series of crises around borders so people have got fear. Set up a Department of Home Affairs and Border Force with the quasi-military sort of overtones. And the propaganda about people seeking asylum as being dangerous and other. And we all know about that. The why that she starts to explore is beyond what I can go into this afternoon, but it has a lot to do with our colonial past and how we have not come to terms with how we colonised this country and what we have done with First Nations people. So what I would like to talk about then is, what do we do going forward? What are the policy points that we should push for going forward? Well, as I said before, the ALP has committed to permanent protection for those on TPVs and shares. Yes, but when? Christina Keneally told us it would happen in the first 100 days. Now we're up to what, 130, 140 days, and there is no time frame given for that permanent protection promise to be honoured. Increase the humanitarian intake. The Amnesty are running a campaign on raising the humanitarian intake, and it's a great thing that we should all be getting behind. Part of that is making community sponsorship affordable and additional here in this country, so that local groups of people undertake to sponsor refugees to Australia and support them in their first year. Bring refugees from Indonesia to Australia. I'm not going to say any more about that because Alfred will talk very eloquently about that. End offshore processing. Now, Andrew Wilkie introduced a bill in 2021, a private member's bill, and these don't normally see the light of day, but 400 submissions were written over the Christmas period, and he reintroduced it in August, seconded by Kylie Tink. Now, this sets out a viable alternative. We have to keep pushing for that bill to be considered and that we end offshore processing. And setting up a Royal Commission into offshore detention. Stephen mentioned before this was something that Julie Mackin is leading on. Only a Royal Commission will have the powers and the protection to draw out the atrocities that have gone on and are still going on in offshore detention. And finally, we need a Charter of Human Rights. The Human Rights Law Centre are leading on this, and it's up to all of our different groups to get behind that. That's my list. You may have other points as well. But how do we go forward with each of this? Well, I was started off with three things, and my beloved partner was a great believer of the power of three. First of all is educate ourselves. We've got to keep up to date with what is going on in terms of what our government is doing, even though it's hard to find out at times. Talk to others. Obviously, we're not going to bother with those that are so hardened. There are a lot of persuadables. Tell stories about people, what they offer our country, how they have skills and talents if only they were allowed to make a home in safety, to study, to earn a living and make money for our economy. And certainly in this time of labour shortages where people are denied work rights, it is just absolutely incomprehensible that we allow that. Talk to politicians. No, people often feel it's not useful to do, but it is really important that we talk to politicians, whether they want to hear us or not. Write to them, go and see them, have very clear asks that you want them to follow up, not a shopping list, but specific issues and actions. Let them know that this matters to you. But there's really a fourth point. Sorry, Anthony. The fourth point is about how we, who are members of refugee advocacy groups of some sort or other, we talk to each other and that we find ways that we can work together. The grandmothers for refugees, mums for refugees, teachers for refugees, doctors for refugees, academics for refugees. There are RAC Sydney, RAC Melbourne, RAC Brisbane. There are many, many groups that are around that are all so committed. And yet we have to find ways that we increase the effectiveness of our advocacy. There are many issues in the world. Sometimes, my children say to me, Mum, get onto Extinction Rebellion. And I look at that and I go, yeah, it's attractive. I mean, refugees, we're talking about a few thousand people in Australia, climate change and its impacts, the aggression of Russia and Ukraine, the threat of nuclear weapons, what's China's doing in Taiwan and the Pacific, Federal Integrity Commission. There are heaps of issues. Yet it comes back to the fact that how we treat people who are most vulnerable is the mark of a civilized society. Upholding basic human rights and the international conventions we sign up to are intrinsic to who we are as people. There are over 100 million displaced people, according to the UNHCR, and less than 1% get permanently resettled every year. Our humanity demands that we care, which is why we do this work, onwards and upwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. That was fabulous. Thank you. Next is Alfred. I was knocked over by your film Freedom Street. Another hero, I think, mainly for making Freedom Street. I'm talking off the top of my head and realizing I've already written it. A feature-length documentary about refugees stranded in Indonesia in the harrowing situation of Joniad, Ashfaq and Aziza, as Alfred says, trapped in Indonesia because of Australia's wretched policies and indifference to real human need, international law, and consequences of illegal wars we have been part of. As you say, Australia's policies are undemocratic and hugely expensive. It is ever worsening situation. 14,000 refugees in Indonesia at the moment, unable to get in. 500 from your film, 500 taken over, I think 10 years or something, by Australia of these this year. Okay, sorry, wind up. Alfred described himself as an aspiring storyteller. I think that should be inspiring rather than aspiring. You've lived in Indonesia, grown up there and here. I don't know when you came here, but thank goodness you did. But sadly to go to Canada, which is a bit of a downer. But anyway, filmmaker, video journalist, director, as I say, inspiring storyteller. I've written a PS, I'm not quite sure. Could not resist this. I asked Alfred for a quote for Outside Court recently, and he wrote, "Free speech is actually expensive. It costs a lot of money to make your opinion heard. You need a privilege and you need to be privileged and have enough capital to be able to give one. This is the harsh truth." Those are Alfred's words, and I really would love to see this shown on SBS and the ABC, this magnificent film that Alfred has made. So thank you for coming.
Can everyone hear me? Wonderful. So to begin with, just would like to acknowledge the event that we're standing on with the people, with the Indigenous people here, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I just want to also preface this that I never intended to become any sort of activist in my life, I guess. And I guess I don't consider myself activist in the traditional sense. I see myself more as an advocate, and I see myself advocating for the refugees who are basically affected by Australia's policy directly. And learning the fact that this issue has been going on pretty much for most of my life. That's just something that's quite mind-blowing, to be honest, because I'm not even 30 yet. And some would say that I'm actually a new face of Australia in a lot of ways, because I'm an immigrant to Australia, moved here when I was in high school, and I also, I don't have as much experience as Louise in terms of living and doing a lot of amazing things just yet. Perhaps I am about to embark on that, so fingers crossed, guys. But what I would say is that having been involved in the refugee advocacy space for most of my 20s has truly opened my eyes into the world's politics of the world in general. Where I come from, really, politics is just something that's sort of under the table and hush hush, because the reality is that with Indonesia, it's almost too easy to just be apathetic about everything else that's happening in the country, because everyone's sort of have their own ebbs and flows. A lot of its citizens, a lot of our citizens just basically rely on ourselves. There is no such thing as structural injustice for a lot of people. Money talks. That's just a reality. And the privilege of being able to migrate to Australia is that I don't have to face those consequences anymore. Our population can actually speak up and actually be provided the opportunity and the platform to actually communicate and actually push through our voices further, especially to those who are in charge. Because democracy actually works for most of the time in Australia as compared to most other parts of the world. And the one thing I want to, I guess, highlight in this space is that we forget as Australians how good we have it in terms of the ability of being able to participate in the democracy, as well as being able to actually have the means and the opportunity to speak up and actually push through things along. Yes, we do have quite a lot of the population that are just not engaged in the politics. I was once not engaged in politics. I'd still rather not on the everyday stuff. But when it comes to things that are necessary, we don't have a choice. We are tax-paying citizens. And I think it's time that we allow other people and we make sure that we bring other people into space. And that's really where a lot of the reason why I created my film, because I genuinely think that in this space, in our refugee advocacy space, not everybody understands the full picture of how we got to this point. So before what I'm going to do, I'm going to show my trailer very quickly of my documentary. I'm going to read a little speech, and I'm going to share you a little bit of my reflection. I shouldn't take more than maybe another 5 to 10 minutes after this. So yeah, just watch the trailer first. And let me know if you guys cannot hear or can hear something.
The thing that happened to me when we got living in maybe happened to a lot of kids.
Australia funds education. Plus, does funding that. Very much expand. And continues to fund the care of the sons. Right.
Last time when you enter to the jail, you meet with lots of people and when you see the different rooms, it was like
I'm tired of speaking about this. It's very traumatizing. It's like constantly talking about it, constantly talking about introducing yourself to new people and talking, and it's exhausting.
Some respects to expect all countries to take large numbers of refugees is a very unjust attitude for which countries to take.
When I was living my, I used to think that the world, outside world, is different from my country. It's just my country that is wrong, and I was born in a wrong place.
Why suddenly any place in I mean, they're wrong place now. I mean, their own place, with their own people, and in their own condition.
I was thinking that I'm not a man, and I was 16 years old, and I had nothing wrong with anyone. There are many good people outside. We can find someone and somewhere nice places to pursue.
All right. So that was the trailer, or at least one of the trailers. If you guys are interested, our website is freedomstreetfilm.com. We are on all the major social media platforms except TikTok because I don't have the time to do the engagement there. So I just want to read you a little bit about what my perspective is on this entire situation as both an immigrant to Australia, a refugee advocate, and as someone who spent most of my 20s doing this. Again, something that I never thought I would ever expect, and it bears repeating. Australia's immigration history began after the first British occupation in 1788. Since that fateful year, the future of this ancient continent has been sealed forever. What was once an isolated land containing sophisticated yet mysterious ancient land containing civilizations has forever been transformed into a globally connected place with the abundance of opportunity and prosperity for those who venture and seek towards it. With this idea and the need for us to find a peace and sense of belonging, my family and I decided to immigrate to this country. And when we landed here, we were amazed by the fact that the government provides actual support for the majority of its citizens. And comparatively against the world standards, Australia has a healthy meritocracy and with decent checks and balances, something that is foreign to me and my family who experienced many forms of discriminations as a minority back home, being Chinese Indonesian. However, we were not prepared for the reality of the checkered and bloody history that this continent has, starting from its colonization history and its displacement of its indigenous lands and population, to then discriminating with those who came here on the basis of their skin color, and how it finally panders towards eventual human rights views, including refugees who have no option but to come by boats. For most people in Australia, the idea of not being able to obtain passport is something that's just inconceivable. And also as an Indonesian, the majority of us would have no concept of having no citizenship. The reality is that most refugees will not be able to obtain the necessary visa to escape from the government that they're being persecuted from if they were considered citizens to begin with. Australia's claim that these people were queue jumpers and evading its rules-based order is simply illogical and out of context from reality. There is no system for those who are simply invisible and not even recognized in this globalized world. The persecuted, the tortured, and the stateless. Wealth means nothing when your very existence is a threat to the people around you. And for some, the idea of belonging to a place at all is something that they never thought was possible. Yet Australia's obsession with the idea of protecting its border had engaged all of its poorer neighboring countries and businesses to its protection policies. What has happened in Papua New Guinea, Nauru, Christmas Islands, various forms of mainland immigration detention centers like Park Hotel, Villawood, Beta, and finally, the biggest one of all, and the least known, the various indefinite stalemate of those who are directly stuck in Indonesia as a result of our policy. to talk about the largest piece of the puzzle, the scheme of things, you also need to understand the full history of how this has all come to be. And who would tell the stories better than the voices by Shak, Junaid, and Aziza, who are also some of the most invisible people in this world, supported by the various experts that will ultimately contextualize the full picture of the situation. It is time for a film about Australia's cruel border policy that finally fully reckons this entire situation since its beginnings. There's no other way for these refugees but to freedom. Thank you for the speech. I suppose to add another reflection upon this, when I created this, one thing that actually quite shocking for me, and I guess it should be something that we really need to establish. If you're an actual refugee that is just very poor and destitute, you can't actually leave where you're being persecuted from. These people, especially those who have the means to actually pay people smugglers and come by boats, actually some of the most talented, diligent, quite wealthy, in fact. And they actually are some of the most driven and brilliant people. They just happen to be in a really bad situation where they just don't have the necessary means, documentation, or just simply don't have the good faith. And I'm not saying that what happens in Australia's context is very similar to the refugees that came by boat in the Mediterranean, or those that are crossing through the Americas borders. It's just that there's a lot of problems in this world, and one of the things that I realized immediately is that coming back to the refugee advocacy space movement or any political advocacy movement, there's a lot of things that are quite out of fractured and everywhere. There's not a lot of unity or even like a concerted effort that is quite visible. Maybe climate change movement has been quite concerted in its effort, but I haven't seen a lot of that in a lot of other spaces. And what I've done is to create a content, an educational tool, something that can really be accessible to everyone. And that's why I created this film. Ultimately, not just because I wanted to leave a really useful and ongoing evergreen legacy tool that people can utilize for their education efforts. But if we're going to be successful in anything that we're going to do, we need to invite others, and we need to make sure that we have the same and clear messaging. The policies are already there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel at all. This is nothing revolutionary. But what would be revolutionary is to actually bring about the change and inviting others into our space. And how can we then invite others to really push the conversation along into a much larger, I guess, snowball effect, for the lack of better words. So yeah, my film is on everywhere now, except for TikTok. You can actually already start streaming it on some website for a film festival, but we're going to have a self-distribution soon. So watch that space. Just watch for our website and follow us on our social media websites on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. One last thing about the film and just what I guess moving forward. Yes, it is sad that I'm not going to stay in Australia because I do have other ambitions, and I've found other courses that I want to pursue in the future. That's much more personal for me, which is the LGBT advocacy course. And I'm a part of the LGBT community. But yeah, I hope that before I leave this refugee advocacy course, I've created a legacy tool that can be utilized for a very long time, right? And if you guys want to see this in the bigger platforms like broadcasters like ABC and SBS, I tried, no success. So we really need to actually look. It's partly commercial. We really need to push this through to a lot of people, especially if we're going to get through these important broadcasters out there. So just want to put it out there, and thank you.
I'd just like to follow up that last point, Alfred. John Swatland and Lizzie, who made a documentary called Scattered People, which was filmed through VITA. John told me recently that they've tried to get it shown through the ABC and SBS, but Channel 10 have taken it up. And I said, you know, that's actually probably a lot better because it's going to reach a different audience through Channel 10. So, yeah, watch out for that one. Any of you want people?
Right. Q&A, yes, yes. There's lots of I want to say today, but it's not for me. Who would like to? Yeah, pull it out. Who would like to talk to?
Not working anyway.
Who would like to talk to Louise and Alfred on their magnificent, what they've done, how to go forward from here? So the thing is, what next? After 20 years of Australian torture of refugees, over 20 years actually. What next? And I think, and thank you both.
We have Wendy over
Sorry.
here.
Yes, Wendy.
No, I don't think.
No, it's not.
Your age, the age, which is fantastic. Look around it up. We've all got great hair. So, yeah. My question is, I wonder whether either you or the witness have any inkling that there is something that like for people in Indonesia, refugees who are Spanish. One picks up little hints here and there. I think we're both probably much more connected.
So just to repeat the guest question again, is there any inkling for any resettlement efforts or any from refugees who are stuck in Indonesia? I have the answer for that, and the answers aren't very good. So not everyone that's going to be stuck in Indonesia can be resettled at this point. Those who do have the resettlement opportunities basically come from the two ways. Either they're the most talented, the most driven, and the most brilliant people that were able to find community refugee sponsorships to Australia or Canada. And those numbers are very much in the dozens, really small amount of people. And that's spread over 13,700 or the 14,000 when I started this documentary. And then there are those who came before the 2014 cutoff, because in 2014, Australia had actually denied a lot of refugees who came through Indonesia to be resettled to Australia. And since the number of refugees that are stuck in Indonesia is very tiny in the global scheme of things, it means that anybody who are stuck there, there's only ever maybe like hundreds of people at max each year that can ever be resettled. And there's not that many like who are stuck in Indonesia that came before the 2014 cutoff. And even then, because more than 55% of the refugee population that are stuck in Indonesia are Afghanistans, there's actually a lot of resentment within the refugee community there, because why are all the Afghans are getting resettled and not the Rohingyans, not the Somalis, not the Tamils, anybody else who are literally still stuck there came before the 2014 cutoff. And worse yet, there are those who came after the 2014 who are simply not going to be resettled anytime soon, if ever. And as we know, or for those of you who don't know, refugees in Indonesia have zero rights. Their only rights is allowed to exist in the country. They're not allowed to participate in anything, full stop. But they're at least not being persecuted for being a human beings that are stuck there. They just simply have no documentation. And again, coming back to Australia, we can definitely do more. Can definitely do more as tax-paying citizens. And I just wish that there's more of us coming to this sort of space so that we can actually galvanize the momentum more. Again, emphasizing this, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already there. It's already the ways to actually improve everything is already here. We just need the numbers, and we just need to have a way to market this in a way that's going to appeal to a lot of people. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. That's one of the reasons that
Stop again.
temperamental this
Yeah.
microphone. That's one of the reasons.
Can I just say
Please,
something?
there's something there that I'm doing wrong.
Hit the red light on.
Testing? Yeah, there you go. Do not press the right button.
Thank you. The community refugee sponsorship model, which a group of us in Australia have been working on for some years. I didn't touch the red light.
Just put it
The
down.
battery.
Just put it down. Yeah.
Okay. Save the Children, Welcoming Australia, Rural Australians for Refugees, Refugee Council, Amnesty International formed the steering group to get an affordable community sponsorship model going along the lines of the Canadian model. Now, they formed a separate organisation last year. The coalition government agreed to a 4-year pilot to see, do Australians really, would they really do this? Now, this pilot has started. Unfortunately, at the moment, those places are not additional to the humanitarian intake, and who comes in is decided by UNHCR and the Department of Home Affairs. But the model we have advocated is that 50% are named places. So we could name people in other countries to come in. And that is, we must keep pushing to make those, first of all, those places additional like tomorrow, and then to have a model that is only 50% UNHCR and 50% named places. I'm not saying it's going to be the solution for Indonesia. While this government has this, barrier that nobody in Indonesia will come to Australia because it's seen as a stepping stone, but it is something that we need to work toward.
Canada and Australia are essentially comparable countries.
Yeah.
Would you please tell us the differences and the similarities between how each of those handle or process refugees?
Canada started community sponsorship program after the Indo-Chinese War. So they started allowing people to pay money to bring people into the country. Over 300,000 people have settled in Canada through community sponsorship in that time. This is the government has its quota, which it pays for, but it also has this stream. They set a certain number of places that they have. It's the community group that gets behind it, pays for their airfares. Visa costs are very low, and they undertake to pay back their Centrelink benefits for the first year, which is a great incentive to help them get a job, because if they don't have a job, then they're getting Centrelink, which the community group has to raise the money for. Most of those people, when they first go to rural and regional areas. They might not stay there, but they'll get established there, and then they'll perhaps move to the city for work and the like. But it is much more about disbursement. There is no reason why we can't have that model here in Australia. A 4-year pilot is ridiculously long. Already there are groups around Australia who are accepting refugees in. The first ones arrived about a month or so ago, and we have to keep going on that one. But we are very similar countries in so many ways. Yeah. Yes.
No, it doesn't work. Just go to Jim.
Thanks very much. Oh. What is that is taken into work? They are going to come and take our job. That seems to be the big main decade. Hang on, I thought we were short of 100,000 jobs. They can't get labour in the farms, they can't get labour in cafes, they can't get labour everywhere. There's an absolutely fundamental contradiction, hypocrisy there. On the one hand, in fact, as discussed last month, we've got many refugees who are they were not allowed to work, even though we're supposed to be looking for labour. So
somehow we can code. Contradiction, we've got 14,000, sorry, really good workers, many of whom are sitting there in Indonesia, yet we can't find. So anyway, I'm just saying it is such a glaring contradiction. Look at that. So let them come. Just the thing that strikes me so very.
Very true. The COVID border closures have shown us how reliant we are on immigration. We are a country built on immigration. And the very sad thing now with our broken immigration system is that we have thousands of people trying to get permanent residents who are actually here in the country. They're here now, but they want their visas, partner visas, so many things. We met with Julian Hill recently in Canberra, and he said, who do we prioritise? You know, he said the visa system is so bad. Who do we prioritise? Partner visas, temporary workers who want to get permanent residence, skilled workers, you know, students, humanitarian visas. There are no easy answers, and these things don't happen overnight. Having Mike Pezzullo continue as the secretary of that department, you have to ask, are they really going to change anything? They changed some other secretaries. Why not Mike Pezzullo? Oh, yes, keep your enemies close. He knows where the bodies are buried.
I guess to add to what Louise has said and what you guys have observed, I guess. Again, how do we then, the next question I would pose to every one of us is, how do we make this something that's more concerning, more in front of the agenda? That's really the golden question, because if we can make climate change, and I'm not saying climate change movement is more successful in this current space either, because it's still a bit slow to transition for us to a lot more renewable energy and for us to adopt more, you know, the more sustainable practices. But at least it's moving along faster now. So that's the next question is how. So how do we do that? And that's why my approach is to create a tool, right? To create this film, and I'm not just marketing this still for the sake of marketing it, but also I do genuinely believe that if we're going to expand the voice and if we're going to expand our efforts, we really need to make it more accessible to everyone. And we really need to have something that can be explained under 2 hours, everything under 2 hours with the real human stories, where we can not only just personify, but we can actually then connect all the different dots together. I guess that's what makes my film appealing for a lot of people, for a lot of advocates. And hopefully, because I'm the new face of Australia, that's another point of reference that people would be intrigued for. It's not just about marketing to the broadcasters and things like that. It's really about how do we then actually talk about this more on the streets? How do we make this as relevant as possible? And that's just really the next step, the way I see it. There's no other way. If there is any other way, tell me. So that's just my 2 cents on this whole situation. And again, I'm just adding on to what Louise has said, and I'm just adding on to what I guess what's already there. It's just about how to put it all together. So yes.
My name's Heather from the Grandmother's Group. I've seen the film, your film,
Yeah.
Beacon Street, and I was really impressed with the historical footage. And I think going back to the history is very important. And the way that those people told their stories, I think, was very emotional and very much affected me. And I know we talk a lot about refugees talking about their experience, their lived experience, important. But I just wonder how, like
it was touched on in the trailer, actually, that woman was talking about re-traumatizing. And I feel like the refugees that I know, they don't want to talk about this. You know, I mean, I think I do see how it's important to talk from a lived experience rather than as Anglo-Australian. But I can't find and come to terms with those two issues.
Yeah.
Which so I think it's always useful. You've got those stories there. They don't have to keep telling them.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to again put a disclaimer with these people. The people that I said, these people essentially came through to me. They were the bravest one, right? The bravest one will always speak up. The bravest people will always put themselves out there. Of course, as someone with an understanding of ethics and morals, like most of us actually do, we don't want to exploit them, of course, for the sake of it. Of course, I've done my best to support all of these people, and I'm promising them to find a way to be resettled as soon as possible as part of the deal of why they're speaking up. Because this, by being exposed to this, by being exposed to the world, they can risk themselves in a lot of ways. Emotional trauma, whether it's resettlement opportunity and its status, or just whatever else that we don't know of. But that's really the limitation in the way I see it. But I don't think we should be too concerned about pushing people that are already, pushing people that are not ready. I think there are people who are ready. Yes, there's also a risk of, I guess, these people who are the bravest capitalizing on this movement and kind of skewing the perspective in such a way. But then again, this comes back to realizing what are the incentives for these people? What do these people seek to gain by speaking up? Then how can we provide a channel in which we can then provide assurances, or what is the end deal here that they can receive? So if there's the right incentives and the right support in the right community, these people will speak up. These people will provide their voice, and these people will provide the perspective that's, again, missing. So I'm not saying that everybody has a price, because that's not the right way of putting it. But there's always something that people are interested in, and it's just a matter of listening to those who are affected by this issue, and how do we then find a way to empower them? And if it's so that it aligns with what we're trying to do in terms of the advocacy space, let's nail that. Let's nail that. And that's the way I see it. Because at the end of the day, we need the lived experience voices. But at the end of the day as well, these people are not just going to say it for the sake of saying the truth. They want to gain something, and they want to gain protection. They want to gain assurance. They want to gain the freedom that they deserve.
Just add to that too. It's not about us. I totally agree with your point about re-traumatizing people and telling their story of suffering, but it's about telling their story now. And as Angela Fredericks, I mentioned before, saying that the willingness of Priya and Nadez to tell their story and to be, like constantly in the media was an essential part. People could see them as like people just like us. They're just a family, mum trying to keep a family together. Priya made it onto the front page of Marie Claire. She's writing a book at the moment, which will come out before Christmas, I understand. So it's not just about re-traumatizing. It's also about saying, I'm a human being. I've got a role in this country. I can add something, and I can give something. Not just about taking. I give something to this country. Yeah, Mark.
Getting a new, influencing. Where do you start? You know, many people far right. Not okay, straight away. Where is, who are those groups that are? Yeah, where that third place?
So just to reiterate the question again, where do we start in terms of gaining some momentum and influence and getting the people to become aware of this? Don't start on the extreme ends. That's just never going to work. Start by approaching the people that are closest to us. Start by approaching people that are just open first, because logic dictates. We don't. That's the least amount of effort to start with in anything. To be honest, and just then just see from there. That's really how I approach this topic. That's how I really expand the consciousness and the awareness to some of my friends and families, and just people who are people that you can see where actually maybe there's a room for a conversation or a dialogue here, and then just work it from there. And also, what I would add, don't be too afraid to engage someone that may be perceived to be on the other political spectrum, but perhaps that's really where our homework is, as as citizens. Find the people that maybe you thought they might not necessarily willing to engage, but are actually a really good listener, and they might be able to find a new way of communicating to just a different group and different factions, or whatever you guys want to call it, just the different circles. And I'm constantly surprised that there are people who are just open to this and actually wants to take action. But again, most of them are disillusioned, and most of them just don't really understand what they can do. So it's just about making sure that we provide them, again, an easy content to start with, and then also another way to give them a more structured response. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We already know what we can talk about, and I'll speak.
Thank you.
Yeah, Louise.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Alfred, but also related, picking up on Wendy's point before, a lot of grey hairs in the room here. In RAR, we are an older demographic in our groups, there's no doubt about it. Many of our members, like me, are also members of Grandmothers for Refugees. So this year we started to get into Instagram, and through the help of my wonderful son and his network, we've got that going. Mums for Refugees use TikTok a lot. Grandmothers for Refugees are very good on social media as well. And it's about making it digestible and bite-sized enough. Those of us that don't have time to sit around reading books about refugee policy and, trawling through all sorts of websites that we do, we have to make it digestible and simple enough that people can get a sense of what's going on and what they can do. But yeah, reaching a younger demographic is really important. John, did you want to add something?
You don't really know. Oh, I'd like to say this.
Over here.
It was one of my observations, just prompted by something you said, please, about and I've been looking at this situation for a number of years. Many of us trying to look at it in a slightly bigger framework. It seems to me that the hallmark of a fascist leader or anyone is, first of all, to convince us that we're not safe, but under. Because that then allows to find develop the validity to keep you safe from it. And I think that really happened. And I think one of the problems when you look at He's done that. We're not safe. We have to be on board. You know, so. And it seems to me that why does it's here is because social successful in how to run that and particularly the AFP does is not actually moving.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. I have an answer for that. I have something to add for that. So just to reiterate, what the gentleman over there was saying, the reason why Mike Pezzullo is able to be in power is because it panders to the insecurities as we have, the society that we, in the societies, essentially. And as someone who actually come from a third world country and also experienced poverty before moving to Australia, and we're talking about third world poverty here, and also I also experienced some form of discrimination socially and structurally. Isn't it then our responsibility to provide platform and opportunities for people like me, for people who actually know what it's like to experience on the other side of the spectrum, who often also have an outsider's perspective to add to this conversation? Where's that engagement, and where is that opportunity where we can actually engage those people? Because those people would be the perfect counter argument. These people would have the perfect counter argument position. Not only it would challenge every notion of all the insecurities that we have in Australia, and also point out privileges that we have in Australia. Again, I'm talking about this as an immigrant. This is a privilege. It is a privilege to become Australian. It is a privilege to be able to speak with you guys today. And this is something that we have to expand upon. Why can't we expand people who actually probably do have the necessary perspectives that we need to counter argue? And I think that's where we need to find the people, responsibly to find people, and find a way on how to then amplify their voice. And again, connecting back to how do we attract these people? What's the incentive that we can provide for them? How we can empower them? As Australians, we're in the position to do that. And as a filmmaker, who are helping my friends who are also some of the most invisible people on the planet, I've done that. So that's how I started it, and hopefully you guys can continue this.
Thank you.
It's a wind up.
But can I just say, it's wonderful to have two speakers who I think are going to do exactly the right thing, and then there's bringing people together. My experiences with Timor for this, and that is we all work together. Really, if we were for Timor, then we got in touch with each other quite naturally, and not to put too fine a point in it, that does not happen with the refugee groups. I mean, I won't list the organizations that I've been in touch with who are not represented here. And that's quite common. We have a weekly demonstration, 4:30 p.m. outside the town hall every Friday. Now, it's myself, Joe, Philippa, it's lovely Rashida and lovely, there she is. Sorry. I mean, yeah. What? So like, I remember with these Timor, we used to invite people in from other groups to come and talk and tell us about themselves. There's something about the culture of the refugee movement, and I use it as comments, that, I mean, it was wonderful to see your meeting, which was such a coalescence of people and ideas, and your film, which did the same thing, which brought people together. I just think that we need it somehow. I mean, that meeting on Friday is meant to be a forum. It was meant to be that, but it's just like the people who it is, which is great, but it's not enough. What we are trying to do myself, and it was Joe's idea actually, is to get a big banner on the front of the town hall, like they have in bloody Madrid in Spain, on the front of their town hall, refugees welcome. And there was another idea, but that's the main thing, because actually no one knows. Who knows that city council is a refugee welcome zone? No one knows it. And they tick the boxes and no one knows. So that's what we're trying to do. It has to punch through. I'm hoping we can do that on the 31st when the decision. But I suppose it's a comment that the culture of the groups seems to be a little bit problematic in itself. To put it mildly. Sorry, shut up, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
But
You
thank
can-
you for doing
You
this.
can wind up on that. You want to respond?
Thank you very much. Yes, I think that's a great note to finish on. Each group has its own identity, and that's important because we want to have a sense that we carve out that space, but we also have to be able to talk to each other. The Australian Refugee Action Network is a coalition of grassroots organisations, of which Grandmothers are very active on, RAR is very active on, and a number of groups are members of that. And that is a great way that we keep the grassroots groups talking to each other. Sometimes we feel that the paid groups, look down on us a bit, but we're the soldiers on the ground who are doing a lot of those vigils and petitions and keeping it in the public eye. So we need to work together, you're right, and I'm sure we will do so in the future. So thank you.
And I just want to add again, we actually have now the tool to explain this entire situation in its full context. There's no film that has done that before, especially for the refugee advocacy movement. Maybe for other sectors, yes. But now we have. So let's make the most of it, guys. Let's continue advocating for it on everywhere pretty much. Let's bring this film to all the necessary politicians. And let's actually find a way to find a commonality once again in this refugee advocacy space. What actually unites us as people? What actually is going to be the future of Australia that we want? Because great changes are possible in Australia. If it wasn't for the undoing of the White Australia policy, I would not be allowed to be here today. So changes can happen. It's just a matter of how we can find the commonalities again, set aside our egos, and actually come back together as one. Thank you.